Welcome to today's session of Donuts in Demand. We're super excited to have everyone here. My name is 𝐃𝐸𝐬. I am the head of marketing here at Goldcast. Before we go ahead and get started and bring our guests out on the stage, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping items. So first, note that this session is being recorded. It will be available on demand later this afternoon. We'll notify you over email as soon as it's ready. So if you do have to hop away at the 30-minute mark, you can easily jump back in later this evening or afternoon and pick up right where we left off. We do want to make this event very community-centric, so I encourage you to share what's on your mind. Feel free to let me know where you're tuning in from on the chat on the right-hand side. I'm hosting live just 30 minutes north of Boston. Feel free to use emojis, GIFs, and also feel free to DM one another in the messages tab. Also, don't miss out on using our Q&A tab. We have some incredible guests today that have a lot of experience and insights on career growth and compensation. So definitely ask questions in the Q&A tab. Feel free to check out the questions that our attendees are asking and also upvote them so we can prioritize the questions that our audience upvotes. So this episode of Donuts in Demand is a little different than what we're used to. We're going to be revealing insights from our 2024 Demand Generation Compensation Report. So if you do want to get a copy of this report, go ahead and click on that CTA button where it says Get a Report, and we will make sure that you get that report in your inbox shortly after today's event. All right, so now I'm going to introduce our guests. First up, we've got Lia Zneimer, who is the VP of Marketing at Teal. Lia, can you join me on stage? Hey, Lia.
Hello. Thanks so much for inviting me.
How are you today?
Great. How about you?
Good. Where are you joining us from?
I am in LA, although I am in a phone booth that is very dark. I'm sorry, I couldn't get better lighting. It looks like it's midnight, but
it definitely does not look like California.
It's 11 a.m. and it's sunny outside. So
awesome. Lia, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and Teal?
Sure. So hi, I'm Lia. I am the VP of Marketing at Teal. My background was originally in organic social media, primarily. Way back in the day, I thought I wanted to be an actor, pivoted, switched gears, wound up in publishing, spent 4 years at Scholastic doing corporate communications. So a mix of internal comms, social, PR, events. And then from there, moved over to WeWork and ran the social team for a little over 5 years. And then pivoted and made my way to Teal, where I am now working really closely with Dave and our team to help bring job tools and resources to job seekers, to make things more accessible, to level the playing field. And so super excited about everything that you all are working on and how closely it ties into our product, because I know it's a rough time out there for folks. And as someone who's been fortunate enough to be on the hiring side, want to try to do what I can to help.
Awesome. And so audience today, if you have questions about, what Lia looks for as a hiring manager, as a VP of marketing, feel free to ask her any questions about that. But I'm also excited to introduce our next guest, AJustin Swisher, who is the Director of Global Business Recruiting at Apollo.io. Justin, can you join me on stage?
Hey, Kelly, how you doing?
Good. Hey, Justin, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going well.
Great. Where are you joining us live from?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Got it. We got 2 Californians here. Justin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and Apollo?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm the Director of Global Business Recruiting at Apollo.io. We are a go-to-market platform for sales and marketing professionals. Most of my career has been spent in building go-to-market teams for B2B SaaS. So I'm excited to talk to this team today.
Great. So today we are here at a show called Donuts in Demand. And I know that you guys have donuts, if that's correct. I have a donut from Dunkin' Donuts, and we are going with an old-fashioned today. That's a very, very plain Jane. That's me. But I'm curious to see what you guys have today.
Sure thing. Lia, do you want to
I also went Dunkin', but honestly, not by choice. So I crowdsourced, and in the comments on LinkedIn, people recommended 𝐀𝐻𝐭's coffee and donuts. I think that's how you pronounce it, which I desperately wanted to try. But my partner and I share a car, and time was of the essence this morning, and I was trying to figure out what was most convenient. So I also guess it's true. America runs on Dunkin'. Wish they were sponsoring this. But I went glazed because I need a little sugar.
Yes, I love that. Justin, what do you have? I know you've got
Right.
unveiling for us.
I've got an unveiling. I've got a box here. This is Third Culture. If they're watching, then they're getting a huge promo here. They're a Bay Area-based donut, mochi donut company. So they make mochi donuts. If you don't know, they're gluten-free, but they're also really delicious. So I'm not going to eat all of these, by the way, but I'll do my best here.
Share the love.
Mexican chocolate, an ube, 2 regular chocolate, and then I think I don't know what the green one is, but I'm excited. It'll be hard to not. Yeah, it's going to be hard to not munch on these.
It's one of those things where you might take a knife and just start cutting into it, and then it's like a cake where it's just all gone.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, we've got a lot to cover today. As I mentioned earlier, we are unveiling insights from our demand gen compensation survey. So let me pull up a slide about about the report. So in this report this year, we surveyed about 229 demand generation and event marketers across the United States, Europe, Canada, Asia, and Australia. So we did run this report really focusing on event marketers last year, and we did get most respondents from the United States. So it's great to see that we've expanded a bit more global. But most of the responses did come from the US, primarily from the states of California, Texas, and Massachusetts. The average base salary that we found from all of our surveyed is the demand generation marketer makes around $126,402 US. So wanted to sort of share that high level about this report before we kind of go into the insights. All right, so first insight here is promotions and growth. So what we've noticed in our report is that salary increases significantly with promotions. So it increases by 130% from the associate to manager level. So you can see that the very first bar to the 5th bar, that big jump of 130%. And then from director level to C levels, it's about 113%. So in terms of the data, it's showing us that actively pursuing promotions and title changes is essential and has significant substantial salary increases for marketers. There are some roles that, titles just don't matter. Your salaries may be based off of commission or whatnot, but in my experience, marketing titles do matter. Your title needs to reflect your work because it reflects your salary. We'll dig into some of these details and how Lia and Justin sees this in their day-to-day. But I do want to cover insight number 2, which is bonuses and total compensation. We saw that over 54% of demand generation marketers received bonus pay. And most of these companies that offer larger bonuses actually are in the higher company ranges. So you can see starting from like the 2,000 company size all the way up to 10,000, you see that pop in bonus compensation. So if you work in larger companies and you're not being compensated with bonuses, this is something that maybe you should look into, negotiate, talk to your managers and see how your performance can be evaluated for a bonus structure. The third insight here before we get into our first segment is management roles and compensation. We saw a trend that marketers that are responsible for budgets and responsible for managing teams see higher compensation. So on the left-hand side, you see people who manage budgets and then people who do not manage budgets, the base salary and the total salary. And you'll see that in comparison, those that do manage budgets is slightly higher in terms of base salary and total compensation. Role type also makes a difference. Individual contributors versus people managers, there is that difference in terms of base compensation and total compensation as well. All right, so now that we have sort of these 3 insights, I've kind of sped through them, we do have the full report, so feel free to click on that CTA button to get that full look at the data sets. I want to now start a segment that's called Sprinkles of Demand. So give me 1 second. So typically in Sprinkles of Demand, where our guests are sharing tips on how to do your demand gen strategy. But for today, what I'm looking for from Justin and Lia is to share tips on how, as a recruiter, a hiring manager, marketers can accelerate in their career by getting promotions, by getting bonuses, and getting more responsibilities like managing budgets and teams. So Justin, I'm curious to hear, as a recruiter, what kind of advice do you have for demand gen marketers?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things come to mind, and I think Lia will have some really good advice as well. There's a big thing right now. Oftentimes you see in job postings that the salary will be on there. My advice to those looking for work is don't be overly discouraged or encouraged by that. I think a lot of companies right now, I would say about half the companies jobs open are probably more flexible than you think in terms of what the scope and level might be. And you're coming in with a certain amount of expertise, you have the opportunity to actually shape the employer's thinking about what the impact of this role can be. And ultimately, compensation is tied to leveling, titling, but impact as well. When I think about how closely demand generation is associated with revenue and sales, if there's opportunities for you to negotiate that as kind of a leverage component of your compensation, I think that's definitely something that you should look into.
Awesome. Lia, what sort of sprinkles of demand do you have to share in terms of promotions? Maybe someone that's already in a role that they've been in for a year or two. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so I think we're at this really, really interesting turning point, whether it's post-pandemic or whether it's this new generation that's coming up. But this idea that we used to have of companies determining your entire career path for you and sort of having this charted out developmental plan of like, okay, here are the steps you need to take in order to get promoted. I think there's a lot more agency these days, and it's so important to be the one in control of that and not outsource it to a company. And I think, 2023 in particular really showed us the power of loyalty, and that's to say that there is none. And that, like, unfortunately, it's this brutal reality that you owe your loyalty to yourself first and foremost. So the things you can do to invest in your skill set, kind of up level and upskill as needed to like think about your career as an investment in the long term, that's awesome. So if your company has a learning and development stipend, that's absolutely a great way to go about it. Or if you're able to financially budget into professional development for yourself and think of this investment in your career as a long-term play, I think my biggest sort of sprinkle is like, you don't need permission from anyone anymore to be able to do that. There are so many good courses. There are free resources. There are paid courses. It's really like on you to take initiative and figure out what your skill gaps are. And there's certainly tools that can help you do that. But I think it's no longer like a passive thing. It's more of an active thing.
Yeah. I would also add too, when you're trying to get promoted or you're planning out your career, it's important that like no one's going to keep track of your success for you, right? And so I think even if we're established in a company, it's on us to sort of to be our own evangelist and salesperson for our career. And so whether you're looking for a job or looking for promotion, I think it's important to be able to articulate the financial impact of the campaigns you've been working on. And if you're able to speak to that in terms of dollar sign, percentages, living in sort of those evidence and facts is a much more compelling case.
Yeah, so really mastering that personal, professional elevator pitch for yourself, being able to articulate that very well. It's marketing for yourself almost. Like we're marketers here. We do marketing very well for companies, and we are fully capable to market ourselves too, and we should.
It's so much harder when it's yourself. Like, you can market any product and it will never be as difficult as marketing yourself. But I think Justin just said that all perfectly, and shameless plug for Teal here, but that's honestly the way our career history and our resume builder is designed, is so you can just go in and add all your achievements as you go, log your wins. Don't think about it in terms of like a resume format just yet, but like collect those metrics while they're fresh. Like if you're working on a campaign with a certain budget, take note of that. If you have certain metrics with that campaign, jot it down. Like your future self will thank you when you're having 2 a.m. panic spirals about not remembering what you did in your last job.
That's such a good
I've been
tip
there.
because like I've been there too, where you open up your resume that was 2 years old and you're like, crap, what do I put on here? And so having that kind of running list where you're making mental notes of like your accomplishments throughout, it's so helpful, especially if you are, have been recently laid off, it's been a shock. Having that stream of achievements that you've had, it not only help boost your ego, but it also just helps you move on to the next thing faster.
Yeah, totally agree.
One question that we've actually gotten from Monique that's actually relevant, and I think that Justin would be curious to hear your thoughts. Do recruiters frown upon staying longer than 2 to 3 years at a company? You hear people just jump around so much. Maybe as a hiring manager, you see someone that's only been at a company for less than a year at a couple different companies. That's like a red flag. I'm curious, as a recruiter and a hiring manager, how do you sort of see years at a company? Is it a red flag, white flag?
This is a really good question. When I started my career 15 years ago, there was a kind of prevailing belief that job hoppiness was a major negative. I do feel like that has changed. I feel like candidates have become much more aware of compensation and transparency, and the secret is out that the best way to increase your salary consistently is to change jobs every couple of years. Having said that, though, I think loyalty, consistency still matters. I think sticking it out through hard times, there's always good learnings. And so as long as you're able to talk to your career changes and the reasons why you made those decisions, I think it can be fine if you're changing jobs every 2 to 3 years. And it's also not a bad thing to have a 4 or 5 year or a 10-year stint on your resume. Ultimately, these are very personal decisions, right? And so I have seen it go both ways, though. Like people who are really hoppy get kind of dinged, or people who have been in the same place for 15 plus years get dinged as well. So I do think there's maybe like a sweet spot that's kind of in the middle sometimes, but it really depends on the company you're applying to and what they value.
I would also add to that. I think that was an amazing answer. I also think there's something to be said for the number of years, like in a particular role at a certain company. Like if you're showing an upward trend of growth and promotions from role to role within a company over an extended period of time, I think that's awesome too. If you're in the exact same role at a company for 15 years, I think that'll probably present a little bit differently, but ultimately it's up to you to tell the story in terms of how you're positioning your tenure someplace.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I think a lot of people have this open question on how many years should I stay at my company or in my role before I become a red flag myself.
Yeah. And I don't know if this helps anyone or reassures anyone, but I was at Scholastic for a little over 4 years and WeWork for a little over 5 years, and neither one has seemed to be like a red flag on my resume. I've managed to find jobs both times. So.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. I do want to go back into some of the data points that I shared and get some of your thoughts on some granular tips, perhaps. So let's talk about bonuses. Should demand gen marketers be compensated with bonuses? I guess that's a very simple question. In your perspective, do you believe that it is a role that is bonus structure makes sense? Justin, let's go with you first.
Yes, the short answer is yes. I think anytime you're working on goals that have kind of like a quarterly or a campaign or a project-based nature, it's good for companies to tie in some incentive to that to kind of improve the sort of focus and vision for the company to make sure things are aligned. So I think this is a perfect example of a type of role where, some sort of a bonus makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Lia, what do you think on this?
I wish I had a more thoughtful answer here. Unfortunately, I'm going to go with the good old classic, it depends, in that I I just don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know enough about how traditional marketing teams are structured in terms of where demand gen sits and the impact it has on the business. The way I see it, just from my like limited perspective, is that we are at an early stage startup at this point. We're kind of all responsible for demand gen, and we're all doing the things that help move the needle. And none of us have demand gen in our titles, and it's a little bit of a weird like, how do you give credit to one certain portion of a marketing team without the others from like an equality standpoint? And so I don't know. I think at a large organization, it probably, to your point in terms of like these larger organizations have a more clear bonus structure. I think at an early stage startup, it's a little hazier and not as clear cut.
Yeah, the roles aren't as specialized, and in a more specialized role, you can definitely do more the tracking of your impact.
And you're probably able, to speak to your impact and the amount of dollars you're bringing in or the revenue you're driving for the business in a way that is just, not as clear cut at an early stage company.
Great. And then the next bullet point that we talked about was the management roles and compensation. It, makes logical sense that if someone's overseeing a team or overseeing a large budget, that their compensation would be higher. For marketers that are not managing teams and not managing budgets at this time, what tips do you have to get to a point where they are managing teams and budgets to get to the higher compensation for having more responsibilities? Lia, what are your thoughts here?
I think it's an interesting one where I know a lot of people want to be officially promoted before they take on an added level of responsibility, and they want to have sort of that fair compensation, especially financially, before taking on any added work. My advice here is a little bit counterintuitive, where I sort of feel like if you skate where the puck is going and you take on more and more responsibility willingly, and not to say you shouldn't advocate for yourself or, have a pay that's commensurate with your work, but I do think there's something to be said for doing the thing and then being rewarded for it. So it's hard to say, I'm going to just take on a people management role without any official directive from HR, but like, are there informal ways that you could do that? Can you start to try to seek out a mentorship opportunity with someone more junior at the company and have lunches and then use that to leverage to say, I don't have direct management experience, but I have this mentee relationship and I've really enjoyed helping to foster their professional growth and development, and sort of take your own marketing yourself and throw your hat in the ring during your next promotion cycle or during your next one-on-one with your boss or your manager, and make it clear that your growth goals involve people management, but start to sort of move in that direction without having to be asked, I think is a really nice first step toward making gains there.
Yeah, I think what you touched on is it's kind of interesting where there's this like chicken before the egg type of thing where you're supposed to have all this experience before getting into a role, but then the opportunity is not there because you don't have the experience. And so I think the tip you shared about, internal networking, making sure that you're, having mentors and mentees to kind of not just maybe not directly manage in your professional day-to-day, but in a professional relationship sense. Justin, what are your thoughts on, getting roles that manage budgets and people?
Well, I agree with everything Lia said. I think that can be applied to like any career path in recruiting, HR, finance. Most companies I've worked for, generally when they're evaluating, and I've typically worked for bigger companies, I'll give that caveat. When they're evaluating people for promotions, usually they say, well, you should have been sort of meeting that next level for like 1 to 2 quarters and proving that you can operate at that next level for 1 to 2 quarters already. And so that's pretty much the reality in most organizations, like over 200 people. And so as unfair as it might seem, that's kind of the truth, even if it's not explicitly stated. And then the other thing I would say is don't necessarily get into management for the money. This is more personal advice. Like usually you're in meetings all day, and then the meaningful work that you have to do that like moves the needle is stuff that often you're doing like after 5 o'clock. And when you think about your time as a sort of finite resource and your hourly pay, often your hourly pay isn't changing that much with a 5 to 11% increase. So it takes a lot of bravery, and I think you have to really sort of want it, and you have to care about the people you're potentially leading too in order to make it worth it. So there are ways to, I think, increase salary, slowly throughout your career. Changing jobs is one of them. That's a popular one. But there are ways to develop as an IC. Oftentimes, larger companies have a manager track and an IC track, and you can actually have level promotions on the IC track. And the key there is you just become more specialized, or you become more of an expert, right? And so if you focus on, if you're not interested in the management path, larger companies, maybe this isn't true for startups, but larger companies typically have an IC path where you can sort of build out value and become a resource.
I think that's a very important personal tip that you shared, and don't just do it for the money, because your heart has to be in it too. Because if your heart's not in it, it's likely that you won't enjoy doing it. And you want to enjoy. We spend so much of our life at work that we want to make sure we're enjoying what we're doing. Yeah. All right, so we have a relevant question about promotions. So Madison asked, how often do you recommend asking for a promotion? Lia, I'm going to go to you first. As a people manager, marketing manager, hiring manager, how often do you recommend asking for a promotion?
Oh gosh, my answers to these are all going to be so boring, and that it depends. But I do think it really does depend. I think, of course, like companies' stage and size are quite different. A lot of companies I know are sort of on this annual cycle where their annual performance reviews, you're up for promotion at certain times of the year, and that it's a little more regimented and a little more specific. So there really probably aren't more than 1 to 2 opportunities a year. One of the things I always really respect and appreciate when someone on my team advocates for themselves, and I respect that a lot, but there's something about a direct report asking me over and over for a promotion without sort of putting in the work to really excel at their current level that I find to be tough to manage as a manager. So I don't know that there's a sweet spot. I have had folks on my team before who asked pretty regularly every 3 to 6 months. And to me, that felt a little much. It was like, oh, we'll work on this plan together, and when you're there, we'll definitely discuss it. But I don't need to be reminded every 3 to 6 months that this is what you're after. Like, I know, and I'm aware, and I want to try to help you get there. So I don't know. I think, like, as a rule of thumb, there is no such thing as, like, it's better to probably do too much than not at all, but there's sort of a sweet spot. I'd say, like, my gut says, like, not more than once every 6 months, but that's honestly so arbitrary. I wish I had data to back it up. I think that if you feel like you are doing the work at that next level already, it's time to speak up. Or if you feel like there's something that's askew in terms of something that's not equitable, where you're doing the same work and then they're bringing in someone new to be your counterpart, and you find out that person's going to be making $25K more than you. I mean, I think that's an appropriate moment to speak up, but it's not something I could necessarily bookmark on a calendar to be like, you should definitely ask quarterly. I do think too much is annoying.
Yeah. Justin, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I think that you should never be surprised during your performance review. And if you are, and by the way, don't assume your manager knows what they're doing. That's like an important thing. They don't always, and sometimes they're just busy, or sometimes they're inexperienced. But to Lia's earlier point, your manager, don't assume your manager is the shepherd of your career. And I think that you should be having performance conversations consistently throughout the year, and asking for feedback consistently throughout the year. And I think if you're asking for feedback every couple of weeks, I think that's fine. But if you're asking for a promotion 3 or 4 times a year, I think there's probably a disconnect. The other thing I think that's really important is there's really 2 things that decide whether or not you get promoted. The first one, which is entirely up to you, is that, are you ready? Right? Like, do you have the skills? Have you proven you can operate at that level? And then the second one is business need. And so that's the really big one. If the business need isn't there, then you're not really going to get promoted. And so I think if you can lean into that and to kind of understanding what creates business need and that, I think that'll help you understand the timeline better as to when, that opportunity might come up. So yeah, that's my advice. Ask for feedback regularly, but don't ask for a promotion regularly.
Good, great tip. Ask for feedback regularly, but not a promotion.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to go into our next key takeaway. So in our report, we did learn that nearly 21% of demand gen marketers experienced layoffs in the last 2 years, with 1.3% laid off in both 2022 and 2023. So definitely marketers are feeling the impact of today's market shift. We did learn that of those that were laid off in the last 2 years, about 60% of those did increase their salary. So there is that interesting silver lining. I don't like to call it a silver lining, but we did see that marketers who were laid off in the last 2 years did get new jobs, see that increase in salary. So taking that key insight, I'm curious to hear, from Lia and Justin on, please hold. I have a really fun video to open up our next segment. Give me a second. All right, recipes for success. So I'm curious to hear from Lia and Justin. For those that have been laid off, those marketers, what types of tips do you have for recipes for success in terms of getting new roles during this difficult time? Justin, I'll start with you. As a business recruiter, I feel like you'd have a lot to share here.
I'll do my best. I've got 5 things I kind of prepared for this. Tip number 1 is just be intentional. Think about marketing, right? Like if you have a product that's designed for accountants, you don't want to fill your top of funnel with leads of bakers and salespeople and all this stuff, right? And I think sometimes people think when they're looking for a job that you hear this thing that it's a numbers game and that you have to apply to a certain number of roles. And that's true, but like focus and like quality of signal, I think matters a lot more than quantity. And if you have a specialization like demand generation, or you have an industry niche that you've developed in your career, I think it's just important to be really intentional about where you're focusing your energy and effort. The next tip I said was, be realistic and honest with yourself. There's a quote I love, that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. One of my very first jobs in recruiting was at a very large tech company that specialized in search. And I had this kind of silly job there. They hired a bunch of contractors to do nothing but review resumes all day because they had such a crazy inbound problem. And this is before like AI could parse it. And it was affecting their brand, not getting back to people and all this stuff. And the one thing that stood out to me, and I think I learned a lot from this job, it was really tedious. And I took a lot of ping pong breaks because I was just like staring at a screen all day. But a lot of people were applying to jobs that was really sort of far out of the scope of their experience. And my directive was, if they don't have all 5 of these, 5 specific things, education, experience, whatever, then just instantly reject them. Don't even bother. And it feels kind of crappy to reduce humans to, the text on their resume. But that is really how most hiring managers, recruiters, whatever it is, are looking at job opportunities, are looking at resumes when they come in. They're looking for like a very specific set of criteria. And so when you're thinking about where you want to go in your career, there's no really shortcut to success. If you wanted to work for SpaceX and all of the jobs that require aerospace technology experience, and you've only done e-commerce, I wouldn't expect a callback in that instance. And if that's the most important thing to you, you're going to have to kind of develop a plan to get there in a couple of years. And then tip number 4 is, don't be discouraged. It takes time. I think the biggest thing is networking and socializing is so much more valuable than just blanket applying. And it's harder, like, if you're in a community and you're looking for jobs in that community, you can find events and different things happening. If you're a remote worker and your sort of community is more global, you can, attending events like this, following up with the speaker after, saying, hey, I saw your talk on this. Just to let you know, I applied to their job. I would love a second look. Little things like that can make a big difference to kind of help you stand out. And, employee referrals and things like that are a great way too to get into companies. So, and then my last tip is, in a dead heat tie between you and another candidate, finishing touches definitely matter. I think especially for marketing roles, like a really nice follow-up email can kind of be the icing on the cake. That sort of solidifies you as sort of the ideal candidate. And if you're not burdening yourself with a super high volume of interviews that you're probably not a fit for, or you're not even really interested in, then you can really focus on the quality of the time that you're spending.
Awesome. Thank you for those tips. Those are incredible. I do want to call out that there are a bunch of open roles for demand gen at Apollo. So check out the link if you click on the ticker on the bottom. If you're looking for an open role, check out the roles at Apollo. Maybe hit up Justin and you guys can talk.
Yep.
All right, Lia, what do you think about tips for those that are currently in the job market?
I think Justin nailed it. Honestly, those were spot on. They were perfect. I think a couple of little bit more tactical, nailing the basics. It sounds really simple, but I think in this market, every bit counts, and you'd actually be probably surprised at the number of resumes we get, and I'm sure a ton of other companies get, where it's very clear that the person was not reading the job description at all and that they were mass applying. And I think doing small things like just making sure you're tailoring your target title so that it aligns with the job you're applying for, or making sure that you are highlighting the most relevant skills in your experience that tie to the job you're applying for, and really trying to connect the dots for the recruiter, the hiring manager, to show why you're qualified without having to make them sit and guess. I think you're going to find a lot more success that way than in blanket applications. We did some digging into the number of Teal applications from members that worked for folks who landed jobs in 2023, and found that for every interview, it took about 7 tailored applications to get that one interview. So I think, that doesn't sound so high in the number we're hearing these days. I feel like everywhere you look, you hear like, I applied for 200 roles and I haven't heard back from any. At that point, if you're not getting traction, I'd say it probably, chances are, has something to do with your resume. And it's not that you're not qualified, it's that you're not presenting yourself as qualified. And I think the first step anyone can do is really break down the job description and ask themselves, like, do I have this experience? And if so, how? And go through your resume and tactically, look at every single bullet point that you have and ask yourself, so what? Why is this important, and how is this relevant to the role that I am applying to? And tools like Teal can definitely help you do it. But even without a tool, just that self-awareness of what is the bigger thing that this ladders into, and how am I speaking about what I achieved and not just what I did? I think that can go wonders into setting yourself apart from other candidates, even in, the best of markets, but especially in a tight market. I'd also say diversifying the job boards and the tools that you're using for your search. I think it's tempting to spend all day, every day on LinkedIn. And I remember when I was searching, it felt like that's where all the jobs were. LinkedIn is expensive for companies to post roles. There's you can use Boolean search on LinkedIn to be able to type in the name of the title you're looking for, or the skill that you're looking for. So let's say demand gen in quotation marks, put that up in your search bar along with the words plus hiring, and see what comes up. You'll get a ton of people's posts all about, I'm hiring demand gen marketers. And those aren't necessarily jobs that are paid for by the companies to list on LinkedIn. But there's some other great boards out there. I've heard Indeed is getting a lot better these days. I love Aura. Alpha is great for women in particular. You can sort and filter by benefit at the company. So if there's something that's really important to you, like parental leave or, a women-founded company, that's a great option. I think Built-in is great for roles in tech. So really just checking multiple places and not relying solely on LinkedIn as your only source. And then again, networking. I know Justin touched on it, but I think tapping into your community and also providing value and having it be a two-way street and a conversation, and not just reaching out to someone when you need something right now because you need it, but like starting to foster and develop those relationships. So when the time comes that you do need to ask for a favor, that you can reach out comfortably without being like, hi, I know we've never met, but can you please do me this favor? And I'm not going to offer anything in return. So just realizing that it's all relationship nurturing, which as demand gen marketers, I feel like folks are probably pretty accustomed to.
Yeah, that networking part is huge. You can cold apply to 500 jobs, but one networking connection can really make that difference. I do want to call out that we do have a Teal's layoff guide in our docs tab. I'm going to post it here so everyone can check it out. So feel free to click through this link to check out Teal's layoff guide, but it's also in the docs tab if you miss it. Cool. I'm going to move into our next segment. So let me pull up my fun little video. So this segment is called Do Not Dare. And we want to understand from our guests here, what are some of the ultimate no-nos for interviewing and getting a job? So from Justin, curious to hear from you on, as a recruiter, what do you would you say is a huge red flag, big no-no? And from Lia, as a hiring manager, what do you see as a red flag? I'll start with you, Justin.
Yeah, so I agree. You should customize, your resume to be relevant to the job you're applying, but only do this if you actually have like the skills, or like the there's a lot of like, oh, you can go and ChatGPT and it'll create a resume for the specific job, and I just don't recommend that because, one, most companies do behavioral based interviews, or they apply tests or skills assessments as part of the process, and kind of getting caught, like not caught, but like not showing up well to that, I think can be a little bit embarrassing. And there's no shortcut, I guess, to developing the skills that you need. So, and then if you are smooth enough to sort of con your way into a job, then you're faced with the challenging situation of, well, now I have to like pretend like I know everything on top of starting a new job. I have to learn this new skill, and so that's not a good position to be in either. So customize, but within your scope. Yeah,
the imposter syndrome for someone who cons their way into a job must be overwhelming. I can't even imagine.
That's like negative imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Lia, what are your thoughts here as a hiring manager? What do you see as a no-no?
So this, I wouldn't necessarily call it a no-no, but I do think it shows when you don't do your research, or it shows when you are interviewing generically. And like, I get it, you're busy, you have a million interviews, you have a million applications, like no one has time to invest in like hours-long research about a company. But at the same time, I think a hiring team, at least I genuinely want to see that there's mutual interest in one another. And I've been in a lot of interviews where candidates have like clearly never touched our product, and it's a free product and it's available to job seekers. So to me, that's more of like you didn't even sign up for the tool like that you're interviewing for. At least pretend, at least sign up, a day before the interview and tell me you've opened it once. But I don't know. And it's not like an ego thing. It's more of just I genuinely want to work with people who are going to put in that extra effort to show up and to be thorough in their work. And I think that, testing a product before you interview can be a really easy way to do that if possible. I know some products, of course, are paid and it's not necessarily possible, but showing that you've done your research. And then for me, the biggest interview question that I absolutely hate, the hill I will die on, is the viral TikTok recommendation of, do you have any hesitations that would prevent me from moving forward for this role? Like, please don't do it. I hate feeling put on the spot. Then I'm left with thinking about all of the things that I wouldn't want. Like I leave on a negative note with a bad taste in my mouth. I think there's just this sense of like, oh yeah, now I'm focused on everything that I do have hesitations about. And even if I ask you for clarity, that hesitation is planted, and I'm probably chances of me like getting over it I'm just going to feel stressed. So anyway, I know sales in particular, that can be a very popular question and people applaud it. Personally, I just think it's a little too much for my taste. So I'd say shy away from it.
Yeah. I think what Lia is getting at earlier when she was talking about, showing up with some knowledge of the companies, ultimately, hiring is a risk. It's not 100%. You could have the best interview process and you could have the perfect resume, and then sometimes it just doesn't work out. Ultimately, hiring managers, hiring decision makers are really just doing a bunch of different things to de-risk that process of the hire not working out. And so I think by kind of showing up with interest and curiosity, you're kind of putting their mind at ease a little bit, because you're saying, yeah, like I'm generally interested in this product or this company or this sort of segment of the industry. And so I think that can be a really powerful thing to do. And it goes to the earlier point of like just being intentional about your job search.
Yeah, I totally agree. If I'm hiring for a web developer and I'm interviewing a web developer, I would expect they've visited my website, right? And seen how it works and what tools we're using on there as a developer. You'd be curious about that if you're interviewing. So great tips. It all makes a lot of sense. We do have a question. I'm going to head over to our Q&A section now. We have about 10-ish minutes for questions. So audience, if you have questions for Lia or Justin, feel free to put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and we'll cover them. So first question from Chaitra is, do you have any tips or sites you recommend for researching salaries? So Justin, you mentioned this in the opening where you said that in a lot of job postings now, they'll list salary ranges. Oftentimes salary ranges are like massive ranges, like $50,000 to like $500,000. Yeah. And there's sites like Glassdoor or Comparably. I think there's a couple of sites. Curious, your recommendations here.
Levels.fyi is a pretty good one for tech. They're getting bigger. They're branching outside of engineering. I don't even want to say it, but Blind. Kind of a toxic place. Be cautious. And then Glassdoor, has pretty decent data. I would add too. Pay transparency, more pay equity, especially for larger companies, is an important thing. A lot of larger companies are using external data sources like Radford and Pave to basically sort of map out where they think they should hire. That data is all kind of like mass anonymized data that their other customers input. So there's a lot of information now around compensation that's out there on the internet. I think both sides, both employer and candidate, have a lot more information now. And so we're seeing a lot more consistency overall. So I would check out Levels, Glassdoor, and there's more popping up every day.
Lia, any thoughts here?
Yeah, so we actually have, I think it's in the docs section as well, but we have a list of our 30 favorite go-to sites at Teal for researching salary information. So if you want to check that out, that's free. And then you can also use the Teal Chrome extension on LinkedIn or Indeed or 40 other job boards. But if you pop open the extension, it'll pull the salary range from the job description front and center for you so that you can really see it very clearly. So one of my favorite hacks is actually to save a bunch of jobs you're interested in to your Teal job tracker and go through the salaries and see kind of what they're averaging out at. Just to have a sort of sense of where you fall within that range and whether what you're currently making seems to be aligned with that. I think you'll start to see some patterns for yourself, even without the formal research. That said, I've heard from a lot of recruiters, and Justin, please, you know this world way better than I, so correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes the salary ranges that are so egregiously wild in job descriptions can be because they're listing various salary bands depending on market. So sometimes it'll be like, okay, if you're in this tier A, maybe is cities like New York and San Francisco, and you have the high end of the salary in that location, but then you're also saying, okay, if you're in a tier 4 city, let's say you're in the middle of, Nebraska, with all due respect to anyone who's in Nebraska, but maybe that is the lower end of the Nebraska salary, and they're showing that huge range where like there's so many factors like cost of living and all these other things to take into consideration. So I don't know. It's also, it feels icky because it feels like they're skirting the compensation issue, but I guess like technically they're not wrong. It is.
Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah. The whole location thing has really come to the forefront the last couple of years with remote work. I come from the tech world, and there are people in lower cost of labor regions is how you would define it, who are making like SF and New York salaries, and companies, it takes them a while to sort of catch up. It's a lot of back end work for companies to map out how they want to look at their compensation philosophy, and then decide where are all our employees now. It's kind of a challenge. There's also tax implications and all kinds of things that go into it. But anyways, yeah, I mean, it goes both ways. There's people overpaid probably right now, and then there's people kind of struggling with, companies who are trying to apply some logic to location.
For sure. I also recommend, if you're on TikTok, Salary Transparent Street. Hannah Williams is doing some awesome work interviewing people on the street about what they make and what they do. And she's compiled a bunch of really cool research and data onto her website as well. I think it's in that list of the docs, but yeah, she's a favorite for sure.
Awesome. Cool. Next question from Misha. In this uber competitive hiring market, what can make a candidate stand out, either in a resume, in cover letter, or during the interview process? I had a similar question where I'm asking how recruiters are using AI in interview screenings. I guess, Justin, I'd be curious to hear from you. Any trends that you're seeing as a recruiter, how you guys are using AI, how can marketers stand out?
Yeah. I have a question for Lia. What do you think of like the fancy resume with colors and different borders, and versus just like, here's who I am. Here's what
I did not plant this question, but this question could not be more perfectly timed, because we just rolled out our design mode features today, which are revamped and new. So generally, I'm a little biased, obviously, because I work at Teal. I'm very opposed to fancy formats that penalize content. So, for example, I know Canva is beautifully designed and it looks really compelling, but many of their applications and resumes just are not they don't parse well in an applicant tracking system on the back end. I can't say all, but oftentimes things like images and graphics and logos and pictures and charts and bubbles, they just don't show up clearly when your resume goes into this digital filing cabinet, essentially. So that's what all the hype is about like, your resume is not ATS friendly. Like, I do think clean and clear is best. That said, if it's a really like tasteful design, I like it. And so I'm like very excited that there's some new features in Teal that folks can use to make themselves feel more in control of the process. But overall, I think like content is the most important thing. And then the best way to stand out is through the impact that you show in your achievements, and not necessarily from just a design alone. Like, I'd rather see really impactful stuff with a boring basic format than a really fancy over the top format with hardly any written information. And I think the sweet spot is like when you can do something that's visually appealing, but also lets you get to the core of the accomplishments as quickly as possible.
I'll tell you that recruiters, hiring managers, whoever's like looking in the system, they're only looking at your resume for 3 seconds. Like, I'm not kidding. It's a secret out. And then like we're so good at knowing what good looks like for the role, that like when I see like a fancy design with like all kinds of bubble charts, I'm like, oh, you've broke my mental model, and for better or worse, you just want to move on. It's kind of the human experience behind the people screening. And so if you are in the creative industry, you can include, links to your portfolio within your resume or as a supplemental attachment to your resume. I think those are really cool. We have a lot of roles that we hire for in content marketing, that we really index really heavy on the portfolio. So portfolios matter. Your design abilities matter, but from getting a job and getting recognized for your skill, I would say clear content is better. Yeah.
I also think in terms of making a candidate stand out, to me, it's like less about the format and more about like their ability to recognize the impact that they had on the business. I think that that's hard to do. And so when someone does it well and they articulate like, hey, this is what I achieved and this is the value I drove, it makes me be like, oh, I want this person to come do that at my company too. Like, I want to know more about how they did that. I want to know they, present themselves really well. And so to me, I think that is more of like that stands out against a sea of very generic like responsibilities that someone is relisting. And then I know you're going to probably get a million mixed messages about cover letters. I know a lot of recruiters don't love them / don't have bandwidth to read them all. As a hiring manager, I tend to like them if they can shine a little bit of extra light and add something in addition other than like regurgitating what's on the resume, because I can read the resume. But there's one that really stands out to me, and she linked out to some examples of her past work in a really thoughtful way. It was a very tailored, like clear that she had done her research essentially, and that she was passionate about Teal, not just passionate about finding a job. And so to me, that was definitely something that stood out.
What are your thoughts on video cover letters? I've gotten one of those before, and that definitely stood out for sure.
I like Loom. We're starting to get Loom videos, things like that. I think I would put it in the same category as a cover letter. If writing a cover letter helps you sort of prepare for your job search, organize your thoughts, then it's a good thing for you. And if you feel like you present really well over video, and that's a great representation of what it would be like to work with you, then I would say more power to you. I do say the more you put yourself out there, the more risk you have of turning people off, though. Like we might have like very different tastes in like what a good, cover letter video should look like. And, as a hiring manager, you're giving more information to make a more decisive decision. So I think it's like Lia said, like if it's done with a lot of thought and intention and prep, then it's probably going to be a good thing. If it's not, I don't know if it would be.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for spending the hour with us here. I've learned so much, as I'm sure our audience too. Lots of really interesting questions that have come in that really don't touch our compensation report at all. So we'll definitely have lots to unpack from this session. But again, if you are interested in the report, click on the Get the Report button and we'll make sure you get a copy. But again, thank you, Lia. Thank you, Justin, for spending the time with me here today. I'm sure we all learned a lot about recruiting and promotions and hiring.
Yeah, thanks so much
for having us. This is really fun. And the donut was great. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to eat on the call.
I saw it. I was like, I love that she's just diving in there. I wish I could too.
It made me so hungry. So thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
And thank you all for the questions. That was really fun.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.